Act 1 of The Second Mrs. Tanqueray by Arthur Wing Pinero. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Second Mrs. Tanqueray, a play in 4 acts by Arthur Wing Pinero. The persons of the play.
Aubrey Tanqueray. Read by Todd.
Miss Paula Ray, the second Mrs. Tanqueray. Read by Beth Thomas.
Aline. Read by Leanne Yao.
Kaylee Drummel. Read by Thomas Peter.
Mrs. Cortelion. Read by Sonia.
Captain Hugh Ardale. Read by Jason in Panama.
Dr. Gordon Jane, M.D. Read by Son of the Exiles.
Frank Misquith, QCMP. Read by Philip Gould.
Sir George Oread, Bart. Read by Alan Mapstone.
Lady Oread. Read by T.J. Burns.
Morse. Read by Jessie Percival.
Servant. Read by Roger Moline.
Narrated by Avai. The present day. The scene of the first act is laid at Mr. Tanqueray's room, number 2X, the Albany, in the month of November. The occurrences of the succeeding acts take place at his house, Hirecombe, near Willowmere, Surrey, during the early part of the following year. The first act. Aubrey Tanqueray's chambers in the Albany. A richly and tastefully decorated room, elegantly and luxuriously furnished. On the right, a large pair of doors opening into another room. On the left, at the further end of the room, a small door leading to a bedchamber. A circular table is laid for a dinner for 4 persons, which has now reached the stage of dessert and coffee. Everything in the apartment suggests wealth and refinement. The fire is burning brightly. Aubrey Tanqueray, Misquith, and Jane are seated at the dinner table. Aubrey is 42, handsome, winning in manner, his speech and bearing retaining some of the qualities of young manhood. Misquith is about 47, genial and portly. Jane is a year or 2 Misquith's senior, soft-speaking and precise, in appearance a type of the prosperous town physician. Morse, Aubrey's servant, places a little cabinet of cigars and the spirit lamp on the table beside Aubrey, and goes out.
Aubrey, it is a pleasant yet dreadful fact to contemplate, but it's nearly 15 years since I first dined with you. You lodged in Piccadilly in those days over a hat shop. Jane, I met you at that dinner, and Kaylee Drummel.
Yes, yes. What a pity it is that Cayley isn't here tonight.
Confound the old gossip. His empty chair has been staring us in the face all through dinner. I ought to have told Morse to take it away.
Odd his sending no excuse.
I'll walk round to his lodgings later on and ask after him.
I'll go with you.
So will I.
Aubrey, opening the cigar cabinet.
Doctor, it's useless to tempt you, I know. Frank?
Misquith and Aubrey smoke.
I particularly wished Kaylee Drummel to be one of us tonight. You 2 fellows and Kaylee are my closest, my best friends.
My dear Aubrey.
I rejoice to hear you say so.
And I wanted to see the 3 of you round this table. You can't guess the reason.
You desired to give us a most excellent dinner.
Obviously.
Aubrey hesitatingly.
Well,
glancing at the clock.
Kaylee won't turn up now.
Hardly.
Then you 2 shall hear it. Doctor, Frank, this is the last time we are to meet in these rooms.
The last time?
You're going to leave the Albany?
Yes. You've heard me speak of a house I built in the country years ago, haven't you?
In Surrey.
Well, when my wife died, I cleared out of that house and let it. I think of trying the place again.
But you'll go raving mad if you ever find yourself down there alone.
Ah, but I shan't be alone. And that's what I wanted to tell you. I'm going to be married.
Going to be married?
Married?
Yes, tomorrow.
Tomorrow?
You take my breath away. My dear fellow, of course I congratulate you.
And so do I. Heartily.
Thanks, thanks.
There is a moment or two of embarrassment.
This is an excellent cigar.
Your coffee is remarkable.
Look here. I dare say you two old friends think this treatment very strange, very unkind. So I want you to understand me. I know a marriage often cools friendships. What's the usual course of things? A man's engagement is given out, he is congratulated, complimented upon his choice. The church is filled with troops of friends, and he goes away happily to a chorus of good wishes. He comes back, sets up house in town or country, and thinks to resume the old associations, the old companionships. My dear Frank, my dear good doctor, it's very seldom that it can be done. Generally, a worm has begun to eat its way into those hearty, unreserved prenuptial friendships. A damnable constraint sets in, and acts like a wasting disease. And so, believe me, in 9 cases out of 10, a man's marriage severs for him more close ties than it forms.
Well, my dear Aubrey, I earnestly hope...
I know what you're going to say, Frank. I hope so, too. In the meantime, let's face dangers. I've reminded you of the usual course of things, but my marriage isn't even the conventional sort of marriage likely to satisfy society. Now, Cayley's a bachelor, but you two men have wives. By the by, my love to Mrs. Misquith and Mrs. Jane when you get home. Don't forget that. Well, your wives may not like the lady I'm going to marry.
Aubrey, forgive me for suggesting that the lady you are going to marry may not like our wives, mine at least. I beg your pardon, Frank.
Quite so. Then I must go the way my wife goes.
Come, pray don't let us anticipate that either side will be called upon to make such a sacrifice.
Yes, let us anticipate it, and let us make up our minds to have no slow bleeding to death of our friendship. We'll end a pleasant chapter here tonight, and after tonight start afresh. When my wife and I settle down at Willowmere, it's possible that we shall all come together. But if this isn't to be, for heaven's sake let us recognize that it is simply because it can't be, and not wear hypocritical faces and suffer and be wretched. Doctor, Frank.
Holding out his hands, one to Misquith, the other to Jane.
Good luck to all of us.
But do I understand we are to ask nothing? Not even the lady's name, Aubrey?
The lady, my dear Frank, belongs to the next chapter, and in that her name is Mrs. Aubrey Tanqueray.
Jane, raising his coffee cup.
Then, in an old-fashioned way, I propose a toast. Aubrey, Frank, I give you the next chapter.
They drink the toast, saying, "The next chapter."
Doctor, find a comfortable chair. Frank, you too. As we're going to turn out by and by, let me scribble a couple of notes now while I think of them.
Certainly. Yes.
It might slip my memory when I get back.
Aubrey sits at a writing table at the other end of the room and writes. Jane, to Misquith, in a whisper,
Frank.
Misquith quietly leaves his chair and sits nearer to Jane.
What is all this? Simply a morbid crank of Aubrey's with regard to ante-nuptial acquaintances?
Did you notice one expression he used?
Let me think.
My marriage is not even the conventional sort of marriage likely to satisfy society.
Bless me, yes. What does that suggest?
That he has a particular rather than a general reason for anticipating estrangement from his friends, I'm afraid.
A horrible mesalliance. A dairymaid who has given him a glass of milk during a day's hunting, or a little anemic shop-girl. Frank, I'm utterly wretched.
My dear Jane, speaking in absolute confidence, I have never been more profoundly depressed in my life.
Morse enters.
Mr. Drummle.
Cayley Drummle enters briskly. He is a neat little man of about 45, in manner bright, airy, debonair, but with an undercurrent of seriousness. Morse retires.
I'm in disgrace. Nobody realizes that more thoroughly than I do. Where's my host?
Aubrey, who has risen.
Cayley!
Drummle, shaking hands with him.
Don't speak to me till I have tendered my explanation. A harsh word from anybody would unman me.
Misquith and Jane shake hands with Drummle.
Have you dined?
No, unless you call a bit of fish, a cutlet, and a pancake dining.
Cayley, this is disgraceful.
Fish, a cutlet, and a pancake will require a great deal of explanation.
Especially the pancake. My dear friend, your case looks miserably weak.
Hear me, hear me!
Now then.
Come.
Well.
It so happens that tonight I was exceptionally early in dressing for dinner.
For which dinner? The fish and cutlet?
For this dinner, of course. Really, Frank. At 7:45, in fact, I found myself trimming my nails, with 10 minutes to spare. Just then enter my man with a note. Would I hasten, as fast as cab could carry me, to old Lady Oread in Bruton Street? Sad trouble. Now recollect, please, I had 10 minutes on my hands. Old Lady Oread was a very dear friend of my mother's, and was in some distress.
Cayley, come to the fish and cutlet.
Yes, and the pancake.
Upon my word. Well, the scene in Bruton Street beggars description. The women servants looked scared, the men drunk, and there was poor old Lady Oread on the floor of her boudoir like Queen Bess among her pillows.
What's the matter?
Drummle, to everybody.
You know George Oread?
Yes.
I've met him.
Well, he's a thing of the past.
Not dead?
Certainly, in the worst sense. Well, he's married Mabel Hervey.
What?
It's true. This morning, the poor mother showed me his letter. A dozen curt words, and some of those ill-spelt.
Misquith, walking up to the fireplace.
I'm very sorry.
Pardon my ignorance. Who was Mabel Hervey?
You don't... Oh, of course not. Miss Hervey, Lady Oread as she now is, was a lady who would have been, perhaps has been, described in the reports of the police or the divorce court as an actress. Had she belonged to a lower stratum of our advanced civilization, she would, in the event of judicial inquiry, have defined her calling with equal justification as that of a dressmaker. To do her justice, she is a type of a class which is immortal. Physically, by the strange caprice of creation, curiously beautiful. Mentally, she lacks even the strength of deliberate viciousness. Paint her portrait, it would symbolize a creature perfectly patrician. Lance a vein of her superbly modelled arm, you would get the poorest vin ordinaire. Her affections, emotions, impulses, her very existence, a burlesque. Flaxen, 25, and feebly frolicsome. Anybody's, in less gentle society I should say everybody's, property. That, doctor, was Miss Hervey, who is the new Lady Oread. Dost thou like the picture?
Very good, Cayley. Bravo.
Aubrey, laying his hand on Drummle's shoulder.
You'd scarcely believe it, Jane, but none of us really know anything about this lady. Our gay young friend here, I suspect, least of all.
Aubrey, I applaud your chivalry.
And perhaps you'll let me finish a couple of letters which Frank and Jane have given me leave to write.
Returning to the writing table.
Ring for what you want, like a good fellow.
Aubrey resumes his writing. Misquith to Drummle.
Still, the fish and cutlet remain unexplained.
Oh, the poor old woman was so weak that I insisted upon her taking some food, and felt there was nothing for it but to sit down opposite her. The fool, the blackguard.
Poor Orade. Well, he's gone under for a time.
For a time? My dear Frank, I tell you he has absolutely ceased to be.
Aubrey, who has been writing busily, turns his head towards the speakers and listens. His lips are set, and there is a frown upon his face.
For all practical purposes you may regard him as the late George Oread. Tomorrow the very characteristics of his speech, as we remember them, will have become obsolete.
But surely, in the course of years, he and his wife will outlive?
No, no, Doctor, don't try to upset one of my settled beliefs. You may dive into many waters, but there is one social Dead Sea.
Perhaps you're right.
Right? Good God, I wish you could prove me otherwise. Why, for years I've been sitting and watching and waiting.
You're informed tonight, Cayley. May we ask where you've been in the habit of squandering your useful leisure?
Where? On the shore of that same sea?
And pray, what have you been waiting for?
For some of my best friends to come up.
Aubrey utters a half-stifled exclamation of impatience. Then he hurriedly gathers up his papers from the writing table. The three men turn to him.
Eh?
Oh, I'll finish my letters in the other room if you'll excuse me for 5 minutes. Tell Cayley the news.
He goes out. Drummle, hurrying to the door.
Oh, my dear fellow, my jabbering has disturbed you. I'll never talk again as long as I live.
Close the door, Cayley.
Drummle shuts the door.
Cayley?
Drummle, advancing to the dinner table.
A smoke, or I perish.
Selects a cigar from the little cabinet.
Cayley, marriages are in the air.
Are they? Discover the basilisk, Doctor, and destroy it.
I mean among our friends.
Oh, Nugent Warrender's engagement to Lady Alice Tring. I've heard of that. They're not to be married till the spring.
Another marriage that concerns us a little takes place tomorrow.
Whose marriage?
Aubrey's.
Looking towards Misquith.
Is it a joke?
No.
Drummle, looking from Misquith to Jane.
To whom?
He doesn't tell us.
We three were asked here tonight to receive the announcement. Aubrey has some theory that marriage is likely to alienate a man from his friends, and it seems to me that he has taken the precaution to wish us good-bye.
No.
Practically, surely.
Drummle, thoughtfully.
Marriage in general, does he mean, or this marriage?
That's the point, Frank says.
No. I feared it suggested.
Well.
To Drummle.
What do you think of it?
Drummle, after a slight pause.
Is there a light there?
Lighting his cigar.
He wraps the lady in mystery, you say?
Most modestly.
Aubrey's not a very young man.
43.
L'âge critique.
A dangerous age, yes.
When you two fellows go home, do you mind leaving me behind here?
Not at all.
By all means.
All right.
Anxiously.
Deuce take it. The man's second marriage mustn't be another mistake.
With his head bent, he walks up to the fireplace.
You knew him in his short married life, Cayley? Terribly unsatisfactory, wasn't it?
Well,
Looking at the door.
I quite closed that door.
Yes.
Settles himself on the sofa. Jane is seated in an armchair. Drummle, smoking with his back to the fire.
He married a Miss Harriet. That was in the year 18... confound dates. 20 years ago. She was a lovely creature. By Jove, she was. By religion, a Roman Catholic. She was one of your cold sort, you know. All marble arms and black velvet. I remember with painful distinctness as the only woman who ever made me nervous.
Ha ha.
He loved her. To distraction, as they say. Jupiter, how fervently that poor devil courted her. But I don't believe she allowed him even to squeeze her fingers. She was an iceberg. As for kissing, the mere contact would have given him chapped lips. However, he married her and took her away, the latter greatly to my relief.
Abroad, do you mean?
Eh? Yes, I imagine he gratified her by renting a villa in Lapland, but I don't know. After a while they returned, and then I saw how woefully Aubrey had miscalculated results.
Miscalculated?
He had reckoned, poor wretch, that in the early days of marriage she would thaw. But she didn't. I used to picture him closing his doors and making up the fire in the hope of seeing her features relax. Bless her. The thaw never set in. I believe she kept a thermometer in her stays and always registered 10 degrees below zero. However, in time, a child came. A daughter.
Didn't that?
Not a bit of it. It made matters worse. Frightened at her failure to stir up in him some sympathetic religious belief, she determined upon strong measures with regard to the child. He opposed her for a miserable year or so, but she wore him down, and the insensible little brat was placed in a convent, first in France, then in Ireland. Not long afterwards the mother died, strangely enough, of fever, the only warmth, I believe, that ever came to that woman's body.
Don't, Cayley.
The child is living, we know.
Yes, if you choose to call it living. Miss Tanqueray, a young woman of 19 now, is in the Loreto convent in Arma. She professes to have found her true vocation in a religious life, and within a month or two will take final vows.
He ought to have removed his daughter from the convent when the mother died.
Yes, but absolutely at the end there was reconciliation between husband and wife, and she won his promise that the child should complete her conventual education. He reaped his reward. When he attempted to gain his girl's confidence and affection, he was too late. He found he was dealing with the spirit of the mother. You remember his visit to Ireland last month?
Yes.
That was to wish his girl good-bye.
Poor fellow.
He sent for me when he came back. I think he must have had a lingering hope that the girl would relent, would come to life, as it were, at the last moment. For an hour or so, in this room, he was terribly shaken. I'm sure he'd clung to that hope from the persistent way in which he kept breaking off in his talk to repeat one dismal word, as if he couldn't realize his position without dinning this damned word into his head.
What word was that?
Alone. Alone.
Aubrey returns.
1,000 apologies.
Drummle, gaily.
We are talking about you, my dear Aubrey.
During the telling of the story, Misquith has risen and gone to the fire, and Drummle has thrown himself full length on the sofa. Aubrey now joins Misquith and Jane.
Well, Cayley, are you surprised?
I haven't been surprised for 20 years.
And you're not angry with me?
Angry?
Rising.
Because you considerately withhold the name of a lady with whom it is now the object of my life to become acquainted. My dear fellow, you pique my curiosity. You give zest to my existence. And as for a wedding, who on earth wants to attend that familiar and probably draughty function? My cigar's out.
Let's talk about something else.
Misquith, looking at his watch.
Not tonight, Aubrey.
My dear Frank.
I go up to Scotland tomorrow, and there are some little matters.
I am off too.
No, no.
I must. I have to give a look to a case in Clifford Street on my way home.
Aubrey, going to the door.
Well.
Misquith and Jane exchange looks with Drummle. Aubrey, opening the door and calling.
Morse, hats and coats. I shall write to you all next week from Genoa or Florence. Now, Doctor, Frank, remember my love to Mrs. Misquith and to Mrs. Jane.
Morse enters with hats and coats.
Yes.
And your young people.
As Misquith and Jane put on their coats, there is the clatter of careless talk.
Cayley, I meet you at dinner on Sunday.
At the Stratfields. That's very pleasant.
Misquith, putting on his coat with Aubrey's aid.
What's wrong?
A twinge. Why didn't I go to X in August?
Jane, shaking hands with Drummle.
Good night, Cayley.
Good night, my dear doctor.
Misquith, shaking hands with Drummle.
Cayley, are you in town for long?
Dear friend, I'm nowhere for long. Good night.
Good night.
Aubrey, Jane, and Misquith go out, followed by Morse. The hum of talk is continued outside.
A cigar, Frank?
No, thank you.
Going to walk, Doctor?
If Frank will.
By all means.
It's a cold night.
The door is closed. Drummle remains standing with his coat on his arm and his hat in his hand. Drummle, to himself, thoughtfully.
Now then, what the devil?
Aubrey returns, eyeing Drummle a little awkwardly.
Well, Cayley?
Well, Aubrey?
Aubrey walks up to the fire and stands looking into it.
You're not going, old chap?
Drummle, sitting.
No.
Aubrey, after a slight pause, with a forced laugh.
Ha! Cayley, I never thought I should feel shy with you.
Why do you?
Never mind.
Now, I can quite understand a man wishing to be married in the dark, as it were.
You can?
In your place, I should very likely adopt the same course.
You think so?
And if I intended marrying a lady not prominently in society, as I presume you do...
Well?
As I presume you do, I'm not sure that I should tender her for preliminary dissection at afternoon tea tables.
No?
In fact, there's probably only one person, were I in your position tonight, with whom I should care to chat the matter over.
Who's that?
Yourself, of course.
Going to Aubrey and standing beside him.
Of course, yourself, old friend.
Aubrey, after a pause.
I must seem a brute to you, Cayley, but there are some acts which are hard to explain, hard to defend.
To defend?
Some acts which one must trust to time to put right.
Drummle watches him for a moment, then takes up his hat and coat.
Well, I'll be moving.
Cayley, confound you and your old friendship. Do you think I forget it? Put your coat down. Why did you stay behind here? Cayley, the lady I am going to marry is the lady who is known as Mrs. Jarman.
There is a pause.
Mrs. Jarman? Are you serious?
He walks up to the fireplace, where he leans upon the mantelpiece, uttering something like a groan.
As you've got this out of me, I give you leave to say all you care to say. Come, we'll be plain with each other. You know Mrs. Jarman?
I first met her at... Well, what does it matter?
Yes, everything. Come.
I met her at Homburg 3 seasons ago.
Not as Mrs. Jarman?
No.
She was then...
Mrs. Dartrey.
Yes. She has also seen you in London, she says.
Certainly.
In Alfred Street. Go on.
Please.
I insist.
Drummle, with a slight shrug of the shoulders.
Sometime last year I was asked by a man to sup at his house, one night after the theatre.
Mr. Selwyn Ethurst, a bachelor.
Yes.
You were surprised, therefore, to find Mr. Ethurst aided in his cursed hospitality by a lady.
I was unprepared.
The lady you had known as Mrs. Dartrey.
Drummle inclines his head silently.
There is something of a yachting cruise in the Mediterranean, too, is there not?
I joined Peter Jarman's yacht at Marseille in the spring, a month before he died.
Mrs. Jarman was on board?
She was a kind hostess.
And an old acquaintance?
Yes.
You have told your story.
With your assistance.
I have put you to the pain of telling it, to show you that this is not the case of a blind man entrapped by an artful woman. Let me add that Mrs. Jarman has no legal right to that name, that she is simply Miss Ray, Miss Paula Ray.
Drummle, after a pause.
I should like to express my regret, Aubrey, for the way in which I spoke of George Oriet's marriage.
You mean you compare Lady Oriet with Miss Ray?
Drummle is silent.
Oh, of course. To you, Cayley, all women who have been roughly treated, and who dare to survive by borrowing a little of our philosophy, are alike. You see in the crowd of the ill-used only one pattern. You can't detect the shades of goodness, intelligence, even nobility there. Well, how should you? The crowd is dimly lighted, and besides, yours is the way of the world.
My dear Aubrey, I live in the world.
The name we give our little parish of St. James.
Drummle, laying a hand on Aubrey's shoulder.
And you are quite prepared, my friend, to forfeit the esteem of your little parish?
I avoid mortification by shifting from one parish to another. I give up pell-mell for the Surrey hills, leave off varnishing my boots, and double the thickness of the soles.
And your skin? Do you double the thickness of that also?
I know you think me a fool, Cayley. You needn't infer that I'm a coward into the bargain. No, I know what I'm doing, and I do it deliberately, defiantly. I'm alone. I injure no living soul by the step I'm going to take, and so you can't urge the one argument which might restrain me. Of course, I don't expect you to think compassionately, fairly even, of the woman whom I am drawn to.
My dear Aubrey, I assure you I consider Miss Jarman, Mrs. Ray, Miss Ray delightful. But I confess there is a form of chivalry which I gravely distrust, especially in a man of our age.
Thanks. I've heard you say that from 40 till 50 a man is at heart either a stoic or a satyr.
Drummle, protestingly.
Ah, now.
I am neither. I have a temperate, honourable affection for Mrs. Jarman. She has never met a man who has treated her well. I intend to treat her well. That's all. And in a few years, Cayley, if you've not quite forsaken me, I'll prove to you that it's possible to rear a life of happiness, of good repute, on a miserable foundation.
Drummle offering his hand.
Do prove it.
Aubrey taking his hand.
We have spoken too freely of Mrs. Jarman. I was excited, angry. Please forget it.
My dear Aubrey, when we next meet I shall remember nothing but my respect for the lady who bears your name.
Morse enters, closing the door behind him carefully.
What is it?
Morse hesitatingly.
May I speak to you, sir? Mrs. Jarman, sir.
Aubrey softly to Morse.
Mrs. Jarman? Do you mean she is at the lodge in her carriage?
No, sir. Here.
Aubrey looks towards Drummle, perplexed.
There's a nice fire in that room, sir.
Glancing in the direction of the door leading to the bedroom. Aubrey between his teeth, angrily.
Very well.
Morse retires. Drummle looking at his watch.
11:15. Horrible.
Taking up his hat and coat.
Must get to bed. Up late every night this week.
Aubrey assists Drummle with his coat.
Thank you. Well, good night, Aubrey. I feel I've been deuced serious, quite out of keeping with myself. Pray overlook it.
Aubrey kindly.
Ah, Cayley.
Drummle putting on a neck-handkerchief.
And remember that, after all, I'm merely a spectator in life. Nothing more than a man at a play, in fact. Only, like the old-fashioned playgoer, I love to see certain characters happy and comfortable at the finish. You understand?
I think I do.
Then, for as long as you can, old friend, will you keep a stall for me?
Yes, Cayley.
Ha ha! Good night.
Bustling to the door.
Don't bother, I'll let myself out. Good night. God bless you.
He goes out. Aubrey follows him. Morse enters by the other door, carrying some unopened letters which, after a little consideration, he places on the mantelpiece against the clock. Aubrey returns.
Yes?
You hadn't seen your letters that came by the 9 o'clock post, sir. I've put 'em where they'll catch your eye by and by.
Thank you.
Morse hesitatingly.
Gunter's cook and waiter have gone, sir. Would you prefer me to go to bed?
Aubrey frowning.
Certainly not.
Very well, sir.
He goes out. Aubrey opening the upper door.
Paula! Paula!
Paula enters and throws her arms around his neck. She is a young woman of about 27, beautiful, fresh, innocent-looking. She is in superb evening dress.
Dearest.
Why have you come here?
Angry?
Yes. No. But it's 11 o'clock.
Paula laughing.
I know.
What on earth will Morse think?
Do you trouble yourself about what servants think?
Of course.
Goose, they're only machines made to wait upon people and to give evidence in the divorce court.
Looking round.
Oh, indeed, a snug little dinner.
3 men.
Paula suspiciously.
Men?
Men.
Paula penitently.
Ah.
Sitting at the table.
I'm so hungry.
Let me get you some game pie, or some...
No, hungry for this. What beautiful fruit. I love fruit when it's expensive.
He clears a space on the table, places a plate before her, and helps her to fruit.
I haven't dined, Aubrey dear.
You poor girl. Why?
In the first place, I forgot to order any dinner, and my cook, who has always loathed me, thought he'd pay me out before he departed.
The beast!
That's precisely what
No, Paula.
What I told my maid to call him. What next will you think of me?
Forgive me. You must be starved.
Paula eating fruit.
I didn't care. As there was nothing to eat, I sat in my best frock with my toes on the dining-room fender and dreamt, oh, such a lovely dinner party.
Dear lonely little woman.
It was perfect. I saw you at the end of a very long table opposite me, and we exchanged sly glances now and again over the flowers. We were host and hostess, Aubrey, and had been married about 5 years.
Aubrey kissing her hand.
5 years.
And on each side of us was the nicest set imaginable. You know, dearest, the sort of men and women that can't be imitated.
Yes, yes. Eat some more fruit.
But I haven't told you the best part of my dream.
Tell me.
Well, although we had been married only such a few years, I seemed to know by the look on their faces that none of our guests had ever heard anything peculiar about the fascinating hostess.
That's just how it will be, Paula. The world moves so quickly. That's just how it will be.
Paula with a little grimace.
I wonder.
Glancing at the fire.
Oh, do throw another log on.
Aubrey mending the fire.
There. But you mustn't be here long.
Hospitable wretch. I've something important to tell you. No, stay where you are.
Turning from him, her face averted.
Look here. That was my dream, Aubrey. But the fire went out while I was dozing, and I woke up with a regular fit of the shivers. And the result of it all was that I ran upstairs and scribbled you a letter.
Dear baby.
Remain where you are.
Taking a letter from her pocket.
This is it. I have given you an account of myself, furnished you with a list of my adventures since you know.
Weighing the letter in her hand.
I wonder if it would go for a penny. Most of it you're acquainted with. I've told you a good deal, haven't I?
Oh, Paula!
What I haven't told you, I dare say you've heard from others, but in case they've omitted anything, the dears, it's all here.
In heaven's name, why must you talk like this tonight?
It may save discussion by and by, don't you think?
Holding out the letter.
There you are.
No, dear, no.
Take it.
He takes the letter.
Read it through after I've gone, and then read it again, and turn the matter over in your mind finally. And if, even at the very last moment, you feel you oughtn't to go to church with me, send a messenger to Pont Street any time before 11 tomorrow, telling me that you're afraid, and I'll take the blow.
Why, what do you think I am?
That's it. It's because I know that you're such a good, dear fellow that I want to save you the chance of ever feeling sorry you married me. I really love you so much, Aubrey, that to save you, that I'd rather you treated me as the others have done.
Aubrey turning from her with a cry.
Oh!
Paula, after a slight pause.
I suppose I've shocked you. I can't help it if I have.
She sits with assumed languor and indifference. He turns to her, advances, and kneels by her.
My dearest, you don't understand me. I can't bear to hear you always talking about what's done with. I tell you I'll never remember it. Paula, can't you dismiss it? Try. Darling, if we promise each other to forget, we're bound to be happy. After all, it's a mechanical matter. The moment a wretched thought enters your head, you quickly think of something bright. It depends on one's will. Shall I burn this, dear?
Referring to the letter he holds in his hand.
Let me.
Paula with a shrug of the shoulders.
I don't suppose there's much that's new to you in it. Just as you like.
He goes to the fire and burns the letter.
There's an end of it.
Returning to her.
What's the matter?
Paula rising coldly.
Oh, nothing. I'll go and put my cloak on.
Aubrey detaining her.
What is the matter?
Well, I think you might have said, "You're very generous, Paula," or at least, "Thank you, dear," when I offered to set you free.
Aubrey catching her in his arms.
Ah!
Ha. It's all very well, but you don't know what it cost me to make such an offer. I do so want to be married.
But you never imagined?
Perhaps not, and yet I did think of what I'd do at the end of our acquaintance if you had preferred to behave like the rest.
Taking a flower from her bodice.
Hush.
Oh, I forgot.
What would you have done when we parted?
Why, killed myself.
Paula, dear.
It's true.
Putting the flower in his buttonhole.
Do you know, I feel certain I should make away with myself if anything serious happened to me.
Anything serious? Why, has nothing ever been serious to you, Paula?
Not lately. Not since a long while ago. I made up my mind then to have done with taking things seriously. If I hadn't, However, we won't talk about that.
But now, life will be different to you, won't it? Quite different. Eh, dear?
Oh, yes, now. Only, Aubrey, mind you keep me always happy.
I will try to.
I know I couldn't swallow a second big dose of misery. I know that if ever I felt wretched again, truly wretched, I should take a leaf out of Connie Telmont's book. You remember? They found her.
With a look of horror.
For God's sake, don't let your thoughts run on such things.
How scared you look. There, think of the time. Dearest, what will my coachman say? My cloak.
She runs off, gaily, by the upper door. Aubrey looks after her for a moment. Then he walks up to the fire and stands warming his feet at the bars. As he does so, he raises his head and observes the letters upon the mantelpiece. He takes one down quickly.
Ah, Eileen.
Opening the letter and reading.
My dear father, a great change has come over me. I believe my mother in heaven has spoken to me, and counseled me to turn to you in your loneliness. At any rate, your words have reached my heart, and I no longer feel fitted for this solemn life. I am ready to take my place by you. Dear father, will you receive me? Eileen.
Paula re-enters, dressed in a handsome cloak. He stares at her as if he hardly realized her presence.
What are you staring at? Don't you admire my cloak?
Yes.
Couldn't you wait till I'd gone before reading your letters?
Aubrey, putting the letter away.
I beg your pardon.
Take me downstairs to the carriage.
Slipping her arm through his.
How I tease you. Tomorrow! I'm so happy.
They go out. End of the first act. Act 2 of The Second Mrs. Tanqueray by Arthur Wing Pinero. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Second Act. A morning room in Aubrey Tanqueray's house, Highercombe, near Willowmere, Surrey. A bright and prettily furnished apartment of irregular shape, with double doors opening into a small hall at the back, another door on the left, and a large recessed window through which is obtained a view of extensive grounds. Everything about the room is charming and graceful. The fire is burning in the grate, and a small table is tastefully laid for breakfast. It is a morning in early spring, and the sun is streaming in through the window. Aubrey and Paula are seated at breakfast, and Aubrey is silently reading his letters. 2 servants, a man and a woman, hand dishes, and then retire. After a little while Aubrey puts his letters aside and looks across to the window.
Sunshine! Spring!
Paula, glancing at the clock.
Exactly 6 minutes.
6 minutes?
6 minutes, Aubrey dear, since you made your last remark.
I beg your pardon. I was reading my letters. Have you seen Eileen this morning?
Paula, coldly.
Your last observation but one was about Eileen.
Dearest, what shall I talk about?
Aline breakfasted 2 hours ago, Morgan tells me, and then went out walking with her dog.
She wraps up warmly, I hope. This sunshine is deceptive.
I ran about the lawn last night after dinner in satin shoes. Were you anxious about me?
Certainly.
Paula, melting.
Really?
You make me wretchedly anxious. You delight in doing incautious things. You are incurable.
Oh, what a beast I am.
Going to him and kissing him, then glancing at the letters by his side.
A letter from Cayley.
He is staying very near here, with Mrs. Very near here.
With the lady whose chimneys we have the honour of contemplating from our window.
With Mrs. Cortelyon, yes.
Mrs. Cortelyon, the woman who might have set the example of calling on me when we first threw out roots in this deadly lively soil. Deuce take Mrs. Cortelyon.
Hush, my dear girl.
Paula, returning to her seat.
Oh, I know she's an old acquaintance of yours, and of the first Mrs. Tanqueray, and she joins the rest of 'em in slapping the second Mrs. Tanqueray in the face. However, I have my revenge. She's 46, and I wish nothing worse to happen to any woman.
Well, she's going to town, Cayley says here, and his visit's at an end. He's coming over this morning to call on you. Shall we ask him to transfer himself to us? Do say yes.
Yes.
Aubrey, gladly.
Aha! Old Cayley.
Paula, coldly.
He'll amuse you.
And you too.
Because you find a companion, shall I be boisterously hilarious?
Come, come. He talks London, and you know you like that.
London, London or heaven, which is further from me?
Paula!
Oh, I'm so bored, Aubrey.
Aubrey, gathering up his letters and going to her, leaning over her shoulder.
Baby, what can I do for you?
I suppose nothing. You have done all you can for me.
What do you mean?
You have married me.
He walks away from her thoughtfully to the writing table. As he places his letters on the table, he sees an addressed letter, stamped for the post, lying on the blotting book. He picks it up. Aubrey, in an altered tone.
You've been writing this morning before breakfast?
Paula, looking at him quickly, then away again.
That letter.
Aubrey, with the letter in his hand.
To Lady Oread. Why?
Why not? Mabel's an old friend of mine.
Are you corresponding?
I heard from her yesterday. They've just returned from the Riviera. She seems happy.
Aubrey, sarcastically.
That's good news.
Why are you always so cutting about Mabel? She's a kind-hearted girl. Everything's altered. She even thinks of letting her hair go back to brown. She's Lady Oread. She's married to George. What's the matter with her?
Aubrey, turning away.
Oh!
You drive me mad sometimes with the tone you take about things. Great goodness, if you come to that, George Oread's wife isn't a bit worse than yours.
He faces her suddenly.
I suppose I needn't have made that observation.
No, there was scarcely a necessity.
He throws the letter onto the table and takes up the newspaper.
I am very sorry.
All right, dear.
Paula, trifling with the letter.
I'd better tell you what I've written. I meant to do so, of course. I've asked the Oreads to come and stay with us.
He looks at her and lets the paper fall to the ground in a helpless way.
George was a great friend of Cayley's. I'm sure he would be delighted to meet them here.
Ha 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 ha! They say Oread has taken to tippling at dinner. Heavens above!
Oh, I've no patience with you. You'll kill me with this life.
She selects some flowers from a vase on the table, cuts and arranges them, and fastens them in her bodice.
What is my existence? Sunday to Saturday? In the morning a drive down to the village with the groom to give my orders to the tradespeople. At lunch you and Aline. In the afternoon a novel. The newspapers. If fine, another drive. If fine. Tea, you and Aline. Then 2 hours of dusk. Then dinner, you and Aline. Then a game of bécique, you and I, while Aline reads a religious book in a dull corner. Then a yawn from me, another from you, a sigh from Aline, 3 figures suddenly rise. Good night, good night, good night. Mwah! God bless you.
Yes, yes, Paula. Yes, dearest. That's what it is now. But, by and by, if people begin to come round us.
Ha! That's where we've made the mistake, my friend Aubrey.
Pointing to the window.
Do you believe these people will ever come round us? Your former crony, Mrs. Courtelion? Or the grim old vicar? Or that wife of his whose huge nose is positively indecent? Or the Ullathorns? Or the Gollans? Or Lady William Petras? I know better. When the young ones gradually take the place of the old, there will still remain the sacred tradition that the dreadful person who lives at the top of the hill is never, under any circumstances, to be called upon. And so we shall go on here, year in, year out, until the sap is run out of our lives, and we're stale and dry and withered from sheer solitary respectability. Upon my word, I wondered that we didn't see that we should have been far happier if we'd gone in for the devil-may-care, cafe-living sort of life in town. After all, I have a set, and you might have joined it. It's true I did want, dearly, dearly, to be a married woman. But where's the pride in being a married woman among married women who are married? If...
Seeing that Aubrey's head has sunk into his hands.
Aubrey, my dear boy, you're not crying?
He looks up with a flushed face. Aline enters, dressed very simply for walking. She is a low-voiced, grave girl of about 19, with a face somewhat resembling a Madonna. Towards Paula, her manner is cold and distant. Aubrey, in an undertone.
Aline.
Good morning, Papa. Good morning, Paula.
Paula puts her arms around Aline and kisses her. Aline makes little response.
Good morning. We've been breakfasting this side of the house to get the sun.
She sits at the piano and rattles at a gay melody. Seeing that Paula's back is turned to them, Aline goes to Aubrey and kisses him. He returns the kiss almost furtively. As they separate, the servants re-enter and proceed to carry out the breakfast table. Aubrey to Aline.
I guess where you've been. There's some gorse clinging to your frock.
Aline, removing a sprig of gorse from her skirt.
Rover and I walked nearly as far as Blackmoor. The poor fellow has a thorn in his pad. I'm going upstairs for my tweezers.
Aline.
She returns to him.
Paula is a little depressed, out of sorts. She complains that she has no companion.
I am with Paula nearly all the day, Papa.
Ah, but you're such a little mouse. Paula likes cheerful people about her.
I'm afraid I'm naturally rather silent, and it's so difficult to seem to be what one is not.
I don't wish that, Aline.
I will offer to go down to the village with Paula this morning. Shall I?
Aubrey, touching her hand gently.
Thank you, do.
When I've looked after Rover, I'll come back to her.
She goes out. Paula ceases playing and turns on the music stool, looking at Aubrey.
Well, have you and Aline had your little confidence?
Confidence?
Do you think I couldn't feel it, like a pain between my shoulders?
Aline is coming back in a few minutes to be with you.
Bending over her.
Paula, dear, is this how you keep your promise?
Oh.
Rising impatiently and crossing swiftly to the settee where she sits, moving restlessly.
I can't keep my promise. I am jealous. It won't be smothered. I see you looking at her, watching her. Your voice drops when you speak to her. I know how fond you are of that girl, Aubrey.
What would you have? I've no other home for her. She is my daughter.
She's your saint, Saint Aline.
You have often told me how good and sweet you think her.
Good, yes. Do you imagine that makes me less jealous?
Going to him and clinging to his arm.
Aubrey, there are 2 sorts of affection. The love for a woman you respect and the love for a woman you love. She gets the first from you. I never can.
Hush, hush, you don't realize what you say.
If Aline cared for me only a little, it would be different. I shouldn't be jealous then. Why doesn't she care for me?
She She will in time.
You can't say that without stuttering.
Her disposition seems a little unresponsive. She resembles her mother in many ways. I can see it every day.
She's marble. It's a shame. There's not the slightest excuse. For all she knows, I'm as much a saint as she, only married. Dearest, help me to win her over.
Help you?
You can. Teach her that it is her duty to love me. She hangs on every word you speak. I'm sure, Aubrey, that the love of a nice woman who believed me to be like herself would do me the world of good. You'd get the benefit of it as well as I. It would soothe me. It would make me less horribly restless. It would take this mischievous feeling from me.
Coaxingly.
Aubrey?
Have patience. Everything will come right.
Yes, if you help me.
In the meantime, you will tear up your letter to Lady Oread, won't you?
Paula kissing his hand.
Of course I will. Anything.
Ah, thank you, dearest. Oh, why, good gracious! Just imagine St. Helene and that woman side by side.
Paula going back with a cry.
Ah!
What?
It's Aline you are considering, not me. It's all Aline with you. Aline, Aline!
Aline re-enters.
Did you call me, Paula?
Clenching his hands, Aubrey turns away and goes out.
Is Papa angry?
I drive him distracted sometimes. There, I confess it.
Do you? Oh, why do you?
Because I'm jealous.
Jealous?
Yes, of you.
Aline is silent.
Well, what do you think of that?
I knew it. I've seen it. It hurts me dreadfully. What do you wish me to do? Go away?
Leave us?
Beckoning her with a motion of the head.
Look here.
Aline goes to Paula slowly and unresponsively.
You could cure me of my jealousy very easily. Why don't you like me?
What do you mean by like you? I don't understand.
Love me.
Love is not a feeling that is under one's control. I shall alter as time goes on, perhaps. I didn't begin to love my father deeply till a few months ago, and then I obeyed my mother.
Ah, yes. You dream things, don't you? See them in your sleep? You fancy your mother speaks to you?
When you have lost your mother, it is a comfort to believe that she is dead only to this life, that she still watches over her child. I do believe that of my mother.
Well, and so you haven't been bidden to love me?
Aline, after a pause, almost inaudibly.
No.
Dreams are only a hash-up of one's day thoughts, I suppose you know. Think intently of anything, and it's bound to come back to you at night. I don't cultivate dreams myself.
Oh, I knew you would only sneer.
I'm not sneering, I'm speaking the truth. I say that if you cared for me in the daytime, I should soon make friends with those nightmares of yours. Aline, why don't you try to look on me as your second mother? Of course, there are not many years between us, but I'm ever so much older than you in experience. I shall have no children of my own, I know that. It would be a real comfort to me if you would make me feel we belong to each other. Won't you? Perhaps you think I'm odd, not nice. Well, the fact is I've two sides to my nature, and I've let the one almost smother the other. A few years ago I went through some trouble, and since then I haven't shed a tear. I believe if you put your arms around me just once, I should run upstairs and have a good cry. There, I've talked to you as I've never talked to a woman in my life. Aline, you seem to fear me. Don't. Kiss me.
With a cry, almost of despair, Aline turns from Paula and sinks onto the settee, covering her face with her hands.
Oh, why is it? How dare you treat me like this? And what do you mean by it? What do you mean?
A servant enters.
Mr. Drumley, ma'am.
Cayley Drummle, in riding dress, enters briskly. The servant retires. Paula recovering herself.
Well, Cayley.
Drummle shaking hands with her cordially.
How are you?
Shaking hands with Aline, who rises.
I saw you in the distance an hour ago, in the gorse near Stapleton's.
I didn't see you, Mr. Drummle.
My dear Aline, it is my experience that no charming young lady of 19 ever does see a man of 45.
Aline going to the door.
Paula, Papa wishes me to drive down to the village with you this morning. Do you care to take me?
Paula coldly.
Oh, by all means. Pray tell Watts to balance the cart for 3.
Aline goes out.
How's Aubrey?
Very well, when Aline's about the house.
And you? I needn't ask.
Paula walking away to the window.
Oh, a dog's life, my dear Cayley, mine.
Eh?
Doesn't that define a happy marriage? I'm sleek, well kept, well fed, never without a bone to gnaw and fresh straw to lie upon.
Gazing out of the window.
Oh, dear me.
Well, I heartily congratulate you on your kennel. The view from the terrace here is superb.
Yes, I can see London.
London? Not quite so far, surely.
I can. Also the Mediterranean on a fine day. I wonder what Algiers looks like this morning from the sea.
Impulsively.
Oh, Cayley, do you remember those jolly times on board Peter Jarman's yacht when we lay off...
Stopping suddenly, seeing Drummle staring at her.
Good gracious, what are we talking about?
Aubrey enters. Aubrey to Drummle.
Dear old chap, has Paula asked you?
Not yet.
We want you to come to us, now that you're leaving Mrs. Corteleone, at once, today. Stay a month, as long as you please. Eh, Paula?
As long as you can possibly endure it. Do, Cayley.
Drummle looking at Aubrey.
Delighted.
To Paula.
Charming of you to have me.
My dear man, you're a blessing. I must telegraph to London for more fish. A strange appetite to cater for. Something to do, to do, to do.
She goes out in a mood of almost childish delight. Drummle eyeing Aubrey.
Well?
Aubrey with a wearied, anxious look.
Well, Cayley?
How are you getting on?
My position doesn't grow less difficult. I told you, when I met you last week, of this feverish, jealous attachment of Paula's for Aline?
Yes. I hardly know why, but I came to the conclusion that you don't consider it an altogether fortunate attachment.
Aline doesn't respond to it.
These are early days. Aline will warm towards your wife by and by.
Ah, but there's the question, Cayley.
What question?
The question which positively distracts me. Aline is so different from most women. I don't believe a purer creature exists out of heaven. And I asked myself, am I doing right in exposing her to the influence of poor Paula's light, careless nature?
My dear Aubrey.
That shocks you? So it does me. I assure you I long to urge my girl to break down the reserve which keeps her apart from Paula. But somehow I can't do it. Well, I don't do it. How can I make you understand? But when you come to us you'll understand quickly enough. Cayley, there's hardly a subject you can broach on which poor Paula hasn't some strange, out-of-the-way thought to give utterance to, some curious, warped notion. They are not mere worldly thoughts, unless, good God, they belong to the little hellish world which our black guardian has created. No, her ideas have too little calculation in them to be called worldly. But it makes it the more dreadful that such thoughts should be ready, spontaneous; that expressing them has become a perfectly natural process; that her words, acts even, have almost lost their proper significance for her, and seem beyond her control. Ah! And the pain of listening to it all from the woman one loves, the woman one hoped to make happy and contented, who was really and truly a good woman, as it were, maimed. Well, this is my burden, and I shouldn't speak to you of it but for my anxiety about Aline. Aline, what is to be her future? It is in my hands. What am I to do? Cayley, when I remember how Aline comes to me, from another world I always think, when I realize the charge that's laid on me, I find myself wishing, in a sort of terror, that my child were safe under the ground.
My dear Aubrey, aren't you making a mistake?
Very likely. What is it?
A mistake, not in regarding your Aline as an angel, but in believing that, under any circumstances, it would be possible for her to go through life without getting her white robe, shall we say, a little dusty at the hem. Don't take me for a cynic. I'm sure there are many women upon earth who are almost divinely innocent, but being on earth, they must send their robes to the laundry occasionally. And it's right that they should have to do so, for what can they learn from the checking of their little washing bills but lessons of charity? Now I see but two courses open to you for the disposal of your angel.
Yes?
You must either restrict her to a paradise which is, like every earthly paradise, necessarily somewhat imperfect, or treat her as an ordinary flesh-and-blood young woman, and give her the advantages of that society to which she properly belongs.
Advantages?
My dear Aubrey, of all forms of innocence, mere ignorance is the least admirable. Take my advice. Let her walk and talk, and suffer and be healed with the great crowd. Do it, and hope that she'll some day meet a good, honest fellow who will make her life complete, happy, secure. Now you see what I'm driving at.
A sanguine program, my dear Cayley. Oh, I'm not pooh-poohing it. Putting sentiment aside, of course I know that a fortunate marriage for Aline would be the best, perhaps the only solution of my difficulty. But you forget the danger of the course you suggest.
Danger?
If Aline goes among men and women, how can she escape from learning, sooner or later, the history of poor Paula's old life?
You remember the episode of the jeweler's son in the Arabian Nights? Of course you don't. Well, if your daughter lives, she can't escape. What you're afraid of.
Aubrey gives a half-stifled exclamation of pain.
And when she does hear the story, surely it would be better that she should have some knowledge of the world to help her to understand it?
To understand?
To understand, to philosophize.
To philosophize?
Philosophy is toleration, and it is only one step from toleration to forgiveness.
You're right, Cayley. I believe you always are. Yes, yes. But even if I had the courage to attempt to solve the problem of Aline's future in this way, I'm helpless.
How?
What means have I now of placing my daughter in the world I've left?
Oh, some friend, some woman friend.
I have none. They're gone.
You're wrong there. I know one.
Aubrey, listening.
That's Paula's cart. Let's discuss this again.
Drummle going up to the window and looking out.
It isn't the dog cart.
Turning to Aubrey.
I hope you'll forgive me, old chap.
What for?
Whose wheels do you think have been cutting ruts in your immaculate drive?
A servant enters.
Mrs. Cortelyon, sir.
Mrs. Cortelyon? Very well.
The servant withdraws.
What on earth is the meaning of this?
While I've been our old friend's guest, Aubrey, we have very naturally talked a good deal about you and yours.
Indeed, have you?
Yes, and Alice Cortelyon has arrived at the conclusion that it would have been far kinder had she called on Mrs. Tanqueray long ago. She's going abroad for Easter before settling down in London for the season, and I believe she has come over this morning to ask for Aline's companionship.
Oh, I see.
Frowning.
Quite a friendly little conspiracy, my dear Cayley.
Conspiracy? Not at all, I assure you.
Aline enters from the hall with Mrs. Cortelyon, a handsome, good-humoured, spirited woman of about 45.
Papa!
Mrs. Cortellion to Aubrey, shaking hands with him heartily.
Well, Aubrey, how are you? I've just been telling this great girl of yours that I knew her when she was a sad-faced, pale baby. How is Mrs. Tanqueray? I have been a bad neighbour, and I'm here to beg forgiveness. Is she indoors?
She's upstairs putting on a hat, I believe.
Mrs. Cortellion sitting comfortably. She looks round. Drummle and Aline are talking together in the hall.
We used to be very frank with each other, Aubrey. I suppose the old footing is no longer possible, eh?
If so, I'm not entirely to blame, Mrs. Cortellion.
Mrs. Cortellion? No, I admit it. But you must make some little allowance for me, Mr. Tanqueray. Your first wife and I, as girls, were like two cherries on one stalk, and then I was the confidential friend of your married life. That post, perhaps, wasn't altogether a sinecure. And now, well, when a woman gets to my age, I suppose she's a stupid, prejudiced, conventional creature. However, I've got over it, and—
Giving him her hand.
I hope you'll be enormously happy, and let me be a friend once more.
Thank you, Alice.
That's right. I feel more cheerful than I've done for weeks. But I suppose it would serve me right if the second Mrs. Tanqueray showed me the door. Do you think she will?
Aubrey, listening.
Here is my wife.
Mrs. Cortellion rises, and Paula enters, dressed for driving. She stops abruptly on seeing Mrs. Cortellion.
Paula, dear, Mrs. Cortellion has called to see you.
Paula starts, looks at Mrs. Cortellion irresolutely, then, after a slight pause, barely touches Mrs. Cortellion's extended hand. Paula, whose manner now alternates between deliberate insolence and assumed sweetness.
Mrs. What name, Aubrey?
Mrs. Cortellion.
Cortellion? Oh, yes, Cortellion.
Mrs. Cortellion, carefully guarding herself throughout against any expression of resentment.
Aubrey ought to have told you that Alice Cortellion and he are very old friends.
Oh, very likely he has mentioned the circumstance. I have quite a wretched memory.
You know we are neighbours, Mrs. Tanqueray.
Neighbours, are we really? Won't you sit down?
They both sit.
Neighbours, that's most interesting.
Very near neighbours. You can see my roof from your window.
I fancy I have observed a roof. But you have been away from home. You have only just returned?
I? What makes you think that?
Why, because it is 2 months since we came to Hyakum, and I don't remember your having called.
Your memory is now terribly accurate. No, I've not been away from home, and it is to explain my neglect that I am here, rather unceremoniously, this morning.
Oh, to explain, quite so.
With mock solicitude.
Ah, you've been very ill. I ought to have seen that before.
Ill?
You look dreadfully pulled down. We poor women show illness so plainly in our faces, don't we?
Aubrey, anxiously.
Paula, dear, Mrs. Cortellion is a picture of health.
Mrs. Cortellion, with some asperity.
I have never felt better in my life.
Paula, looking round innocently.
Have I said anything awkward, Aubrey? Tell Mrs. Cortellion how stupid and thoughtless I always am.
Mrs. Cortellion, to Drummle, who is now standing close to her.
Really, Cayley.
He soothes her with a nod and smile and a motion of his finger to his lip.
Mrs. Tanqueray, I am afraid my explanation will not be quite so satisfactory as either of those you have just helped me to. You may have heard, but if you have heard, you have doubtless forgotten, that 20 years ago, when your husband first lived here, I was a constant visitor at Higher Combe.
20 years ago? Fancy, I was a naughty little child then.
Possibly. Well, at that time, and till the end of her life, my affections were centred upon the lady of this house.
Were they? That was very sweet of you.
Aline approaches Mrs. Cortellion, listening intently to her.
I will say no more on that score, but I must add this. When 2 months ago you came here, I realized, perhaps for the first time, that I was a middle-aged woman, and that it had become impossible for me to accept without some effort a breaking in upon many tender associations. There, Mrs. Tanqueray, that is my confession. Will you try to understand it and pardon me?
Paula watching Aline sneeringly.
Aline, dear, you appear to be very interested in Mrs. Cortelyon's reminiscences. I don't think I can do better than make you my mouthpiece. There is such sympathy between us. What do you say? Can we bring ourselves to forgive Mrs. Cortelyon for neglecting us for 2 weary months?
Mrs. Cortellion to Aline pleasantly.
Well, Aline.
With a little cry of tenderness, Aline impulsively sits beside Mrs. Cortellion and takes her hand.
My dear child.
Paula in an undertone to Aubrey.
Aline isn't so very slow in taking to Mrs. Cortelyon.
Mrs. Cortellion to Paula and Aubrey.
Come, this encourages me to broach my scheme. Mrs. Tanqueray, it strikes me that you 2 good people are just now excellent company for each other, while Aline would perhaps be glad of a little peep into the world you are anxious to avoid. Now, I am going to Paris tomorrow for a week or 2 before settling down in Chester Square, so don't gasp, both of you. If this girl is willing, and you have made no other arrangements for her, will you let her come with me to Paris, and afterwards remain with me in town during the season?
Aline utters an exclamation of surprise. Paula is silent.
What do you say?
Paula, dear.
Hesitatingly.
My dear Mrs. Cortelyon, this is wonderfully kind of you. I am really at a loss to... Hey, Cayley?
Drummle watching Paula apprehensively.
Kind? Now I must say I don't think so. I begged Alice to take me to Paris, and she declined. I am thrown over for Aline. Ha ha ha!
What nonsense you talk, Cayley.
The laughter dies out. Paula remains quite still.
Paula, dear?
Paula slowly collecting herself.
One moment. I don't quite...
To Mrs. Cortellion.
You propose that Aline leaves Higher Combe almost at once, and remains with you some months?
It would be a mercy to me. You can afford to be generous to a desolate old widow. Come, Mrs. Tanqueray, won't you spare her?
Won't I spare her?
Suspiciously.
Have you mentioned your plan to Aubrey before I came in?
No, I had no opportunity.
Nor to Aline?
Oh, no.
Paula looking about her in suppressed excitement.
This hasn't been discussed at all? Behind my back?
My dear Mrs. Tanqueray.
Aline, let us hear your voice in the matter.
I should like to go with Mrs. Cortellion.
Ah.
That is, if...
If what?
Aline looking towards Aubrey appealingly.
Papa!
Paula in a hard voice.
Oh, of course, I forgot.
To Aubrey.
My dear Aubrey, it rests with you, naturally, whether I am to lose Aline.
Lose Aline?
Advancing to Paula.
There is no question of losing Aline. You would see Aline in town constantly when she returned from Paris. Isn't that so, Mrs. Cortelyon?
Certainly.
Oh, I didn't know I should be allowed that privilege.
Privilege, my dear Mrs. Tanqueray?
Ha! That makes all the difference, doesn't it?
Aubrey with assumed gaiety.
All the difference? I should think so.
To Aline, laying his hand upon her head, tenderly.
And you are quite certain you wish to see what the world is like on the other side of Blackmoor?
If you are willing, Papa, I am quite certain.
Aubrey looking at Paula irresolutely, then speaking with an effort.
Then I am willing.
Paula, rising and striking the table lightly with her clenched hand.
That decides it.
There is a general movement, excitedly to Mrs. Cortellion, who advances towards her.
When do you want her?
We go to town this afternoon at 5 o'clock and sleep tonight at Bailey's. There is barely time for her to make her preparations.
I will undertake that she is ready.
I've a great deal to scramble through at home, too, as you may guess. Goodbye.
Paula, turning away.
Mrs. Cortellion is going.
Paula stands looking out of the window, with her back to those in the room. Mrs. Cortellion to Drummle.
Cayley.
Eh?
I've gone through it for the sake of Aubrey and his child, but I feel 100. Is that a mad woman?
Of course. All jealous women are mad.
He goes out with Aubrey. Mrs. Cortellion, hesitatingly to Paula.
Goodbye, Mrs. Tanqueray.
Paula inclines her head with the slightest possible movement, then resumes her former position. Aline comes from the hall and takes Mrs. Cortellion out of the room. After a brief silence, Paula turns with a fierce cry and hurriedly takes off her coat and hat and tosses them upon the settee.
Ah!
She drops into the chair as Aubrey returns. He stands looking at her.
Who's that?
I. You have altered your mind about going out?
Yes. Please to ring the bell.
Aubrey touching the bell.
You are angry about Mrs. Cortellion and Aline. Let me try to explain my reasons.
Be careful what you say to me just now. I have never felt like this, except once in my life. Be careful what you say to me.
A servant enters. Paula, rising.
Is Watts at the door with the cart?
Yes, ma'am.
Tell him to drive down to the post office directly, with this.
Picking up the letter which has been lying upon the table.
With that?
Yes, my letter to Lady Orade.
Giving the letter to the servant, who goes out.
Surely you don't wish me to countermand any order of yours to a servant. Call the man back. Take the letter from him.
I have not the slightest intention of doing so.
I must, then.
Going to the door. She snatches up her hat and coat and follows him.
What are you going to do?
If you stop that letter, I walk out of the house.
He hesitates, then leaves the door.
I am right in believing that to be the letter inviting George Oread and his wife to stay here, am I not?
Oh, yes, quite right.
Let it go. I'll write to him by and by.
Paula, facing him.
You dare!
Hush, Paula.
Insult me again, and upon my word I'll go straight out of the house.
Insult you?
Insult me! What else is it? My God, what else is it? What do you mean by taking Aline from me?
Listen.
Listen to me! And how do you take her? You pack her off in the care of a woman who has deliberately held aloof from me, who's thrown mud at me. Yet this Cortellion creature has only to put foot here once to be entrusted with the charge of a girl you know I dearly want to keep near me.
Paula, dear, hear me.
Of course. I can't be so useful to your daughter as such people as this, so I'm to be given the go-by for any town friend of yours who turns up and chooses to patronize us. Very well. At any rate, you take Aline from me, you justify my looking for companions where I can most readily find them.
You wish me to fully appreciate your reason for sending that letter to Lady Oread?
Precisely, I do.
And could you, after all, go back to associates of that order? It's not possible.
Paula, mockingly.
What? Not after the refining influence of these intensely respectable surroundings?
Going to the door.
We'll see.
Paula!
We'll see.
She goes out. He stands still, looking after her. End of the second act.